The bullet grazed past Victoria's shoulder so close she felt the heat of it singe through her cotton dress. And in that split second before she hit the dusty ground of Wood River's Main Street, she wondered if dying at 23 meant she would never know what it felt like to be truly loved. The shot had come from the Silver Star Saloon, where a drunken dispute over cards had spilled into the Montana afternoon like poison from a broken bottle. She scrambled behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs, dust coating her dark hair and the medical bag she clutched desperately to her chest. "Stay down," a voice commanded, and suddenly there was a man crouched beside her, his broad shoulders blocking her view of the chaos. He wore a dusty brown hat and a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, and his eyes were the color of summer wheat when he glanced at her to make sure she was unharmed. "You hurt, miss?" "No, I'm fine," Victoria managed, though her voice shook. Another shot rang out, and the man pressed closer to the trough, one hand instinctively moving to shield her. She could smell leather and sage and something distinctly masculine that made her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. The sheriff's voice boomed across the street, ordering everyone to stand down. Victoria's rescuer stayed where he was for a moment longer, scanning the area with practiced caution before he stood and offered her his hand. His palm was calloused and warm when she took it, and he pulled her to her feet with an easy strength that suggested he was used to hard work. "You sure you're all right?" he asked again, his gaze moving over her face with genuine concern. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. There was a kindness in his eyes that seemed at odds with the gun belt slung low on his hips. "Yes, thank you," Victoria said, brushing dust from her dress with trembling hands. "I was on my way to the Davies ranch. Their son took ill with fever." "You're the new doctor's assistant," he said, recognition dawning. "Doc Williams' niece from back east. I heard you'd come to help him with his practice." "Victoria Dalton," she confirmed, extending her hand properly this time. "Though I'm more than just his assistant. I've studied medicine myself, even if they wouldn't let me attend formal medical school." His handshake was firm and respectful. "Preston Cole. I run cattle just north of town." He retrieved her medical bag from where it had fallen, checking to make sure nothing had broken. "Let me ride out to the Davies place with you. Streets aren't safe today, apparently." Victoria wanted to argue that she could manage on her own, but the trembling in her legs suggested otherwise. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Cole." "Preston," he corrected, a small smile softening his features. "Mr. Cole was my father, and he's been gone 5 years now." They walked to the livery stable where Preston kept his horse, a sturdy roan gelding he called Rusty. He saddled the animal with efficient movements while Victoria rented a gentle mare named Daisy. As they rode out of Wood River, the mountains rose before them like ancient sentinels, their peaks still crowned with snow despite it being June of 1882. The Davies ranch sat in a valley where cottonwoods grew thick along a creek. Preston stayed outside with Mr. Davies while Victoria examined young Thomas, who was indeed burning with fever. She worked quickly, administering willow bark tea and cool compresses, relieved to see that it appeared to be nothing more serious than a bad summer cold. "Mrs. Davies watched with grateful eyes as Victoria showed her how to continue the treatment. "You have a gift," Mrs. Davies said softly. "My Thomas is lucky you were willing to come all this way." Victoria packed her supplies carefully. "I'm glad I could help." Preston was waiting by the horses when she emerged, the late afternoon sun turning everything golden. He'd been talking with Mr. Davies about cattle prices, but he straightened when he saw her, his attention shifting completely. "How's the boy?" "He'll recover with rest and plenty of fluids," Victoria reported. She paused, then added, "Thank you for waiting, and for escorting me out here." "My pleasure," Preston said, and something in the way he looked at her made her heart skip. "I was heading this direction anyway. My spread is just over the next ridge." They rode back toward Wood River as the sky turned pink and orange. Preston pointed out landmarks and told her about the area, his voice easy and warm. He'd been born in Kansas, he said, but came to Montana 5 years ago after his father died, looking for a fresh start. He'd built his ranch from nothing, working as a ranch hand until he had enough to buy his own land and cattle. "It's not much yet," he admitted, "but it's mine, free and clear." Victoria found herself watching the way he sat his horse, comfortable and natural as breathing. "That must be a good feeling." "Best feeling in the world," Preston agreed. "Well, almost the best." His eyes met hers briefly, and Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer evening. They were halfway back to town when they came upon an overturned wagon. A man lay pinned beneath one of the wheels, his face twisted in pain. Preston was off his horse before Victoria had fully registered what was happening, kneeling beside the injured man while Victoria grabbed her medical bag. "It's my leg," the man gasped. He was perhaps 40, his face weathered and lined with pain. "Can't get free." Preston examined the situation quickly. "We need to lift the wagon. Miss Dalton, can you pull him clear when I raise it?" Victoria positioned herself at the man's shoulders. "Ready." Preston braced himself under the wagon bed, muscles straining as he lifted. For a moment, nothing happened, and then slowly, impossibly, the wagon rose a few crucial inches. Victoria pulled hard, dragging the injured man clear. Preston lowered the wagon carefully before rushing to help. The man's leg was badly broken, bone visible through torn flesh. Victoria worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey from the man's own supplies and setting the brake as best she could. Preston held the man's shoulders steady while she worked, his presence calm and reassuring. "You'll need proper medical attention," Victoria said firmly. "We'll get you back to town." They fashioned a travois from branches and rope, securing the injured man as gently as possible behind Preston's horse. It was nearly full dark by the time they reached Wood River, and Doc Williams met them at his office with lantern lights spilling into the street. "Good work, Victoria," her uncle said after examining her field dressing. He was a stocky man of 55 with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "You've probably saved his leg." Preston helped carry the man inside, then insisted on walking Victoria to her uncle's house at the edge of town. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant pine. "You were remarkable today," Preston said as they walked, cool-headed under pressure. "So were you," Victoria replied. "Not many men could have lifted that wagon alone. I was motivated." His voice was quiet. "Didn't want anything to delay getting him help." They reached her uncle's modest 2-story house, and Victoria turned to face Preston in the moonlight. He'd removed his hat, holding it in both hands, and his expression was earnest. "Miss Dalton, I know we only just met today, but I'd like to call on you, properly I mean, if you'd allow it." Victoria's heart fluttered. "I'd like that very much, but please call me Victoria." His smile was like sunrise. "Victoria then, and you'll call me Preston." "Preston," she agreed, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. Over the following weeks, Preston became a regular presence in Victoria's life. He would appear at her uncle's office with various excuses. A fence post-injury here. A horse that needed checking there, though Victoria suspected he was far more durable and his animals far healthier than he let on. They took walks along the creek that ran through town, and he brought her wildflowers that he'd claim he just happened to pick on the way. On Sundays after church, he would join her uncle's family for dinner, and Victoria found herself watching for him during the service, her heart lifting when she spotted his tall form in the back pew. He always looked freshly scrubbed for church, his hair damp and his shirt pressed, though by Monday he'd be back in his work clothes, dust on his boots and Wyoming sun on his face. One evening in late July, he took her to a dance at the community hall. Victoria wore her best dress, pale blue cotton with tiny buttons up the back, and Preston's eyes had gone wide when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her feel more lovely than any elaborate compliment could have. They danced until her feet ached, Preston's hand firm at her waist, his other hand gentle as it held hers. He wasn't the most graceful dancer, but he was earnest and attentive, and when he looked down at her with those wheat-colored eyes, Victoria felt like the only woman in the room. "I need to tell you something," Preston said as they stood outside in the cool night air, taking a break from the crowded hall. Music drifted through the open windows, but his attention was entirely on her. "What is it?" Victoria asked, though her heart already knew. "I'm falling in love with you," Preston said quietly. "I know it's fast, and maybe I should wait longer to say it, but I'm not a man who plays games. You've become the best part of my days, Victoria, the part I look forward to most." Victoria reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I started that very first day when you protected me during the shooting." Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise. "I want to court you properly, do things right. And when enough time has passed that it's respectable, I want to ask you to marry me." "Yes," Victoria said, tears pricking her eyes. "Whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close while the music played and the stars wheeled overhead. Victoria pressed her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought that she had never felt safer or more cherished in her entire life. August brought heat that shimmered off the streets and dried the creek to a trickle. Preston's ranch kept him busy, but he made time to visit Victoria almost every day, even if only for a few minutes. He would appear at sunset, dusty and tired from a long day's work, and his face would light up when he saw her. They talked about everything. Preston told her about his dreams of expanding his ranch, of building a real house instead of the one-room cabin he lived in now. Victoria shared her frustration at not being allowed to practice medicine officially, at always having to defer to her uncle in public, even when she knew she was right. "You're smarter than half the doctors I've ever met," Preston said fiercely. "Anyone with eyes can see that." "The law doesn't care about that," Victoria replied, but she was touched by his faith in her. In September, Preston invited her to see his ranch. Doc Williams agreed to chaperone, riding along with them on a crisp autumn morning when the aspens were just beginning to turn gold. Preston's property was more extensive than Victoria had realized, several hundred acres of good grazing land with water rights to a spring-fed creek. The cabin was indeed small and basic, but it was tidy and well-maintained. Preston showed them around with obvious pride, pointing out where he planned to build a proper house, a barn for the winter, corrals for breaking horses. "It's wonderful," Victoria said honestly. She could see it all through his eyes, the potential, the future waiting to be built. "You've done so much already." "I want to do more," Preston said, looking at her with meaning clear in his eyes. "I want to build something that will last, something worth passing down." On the ride back, Doc Williams tactfully rode ahead, giving them a measure of privacy. Preston reached over and took Victoria's hand. "I know I said I'd wait longer," he began. "But Victoria, I can't see any reason to delay. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Yes, Victoria said immediately, joy bubbling up inside her. Yes, absolutely yes. Preston whooped with delight, startling both horses. He pulled Rusty close to Daisy and leaned over, kissing Victoria soundly while Doc Williams pretended very hard not to notice. They were married in October, when the mountains were painted with autumn color and the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. It was a simple ceremony in the Wood River Church, with most of the town in attendance. Victoria wore a dress of cream-colored silk that her mother had sent from Boston, and Preston wore a new black suit that made him look impossibly handsome. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them man and wife, Preston kissed her with such tender reverence that Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks. They were happy tears, joyful tears, tears of a heart so full it overflowed. The reception was held at the community hall, with food brought by every family in town and music provided by anyone who could play an instrument. They danced their first dance as husband and wife to a fiddle version of Beautiful Dreamer, and Victoria thought she might burst from happiness. Mrs. Cole, Preston murmured against her ear as they swayed together. I like the sound of that. So do I, Victoria replied. So do I. They spent their wedding night in a room at Wood River's only hotel, a luxury Preston had insisted on. He was gentle and patient with her inexperience, and when he made love to her for the first time, Victoria understood what the married women meant when they whispered about the bond between husband and wife. It was more than physical pleasure, though there was plenty of that. It was intimacy of spirit, a joining of souls, a promise made flesh. Afterward they lay tangled together, Preston's hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. I'm the luckiest man alive, he said softly. I'm fairly lucky myself, Victoria teased, but then grew serious. Preston, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before, but I was afraid. He propped himself up on one elbow, concern creasing his brow. You can tell me anything. Victoria took a deep breath. When I was 19, I was very ill, scarlet fever. It nearly killed me, and when I finally recovered, the doctors said that it had damaged my body internally. They said I would never be able to carry a child. Tears filled her eyes. I cannot give you children, Preston. I should have told you before we married, but I was selfish. I love you so much, and I was afraid you wouldn't want me if you knew. Preston was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria's heart broke a little more with each second that passed. Then he cupped her face in both his hands, his expression fierce and tender at once. Then you give me everything else instead, he said firmly. Do you hear me, Victoria? Everything else. Your love, your laughter, your brilliant mind, and your brave heart. Your company through all the years we have ahead of us. That's more than enough. That's everything. But you wanted to build something to pass down, Victoria said through her tears. You wanted a family. I have a family, Preston said. I have you. And if we want children, there are plenty in this world who need homes. We could provide that. But you, Victoria Cole, you are not less valuable, not less wanted, not less loved because of this. You're perfect exactly as you are, and I'm honored that you're my wife. Victoria broke down then, sobbing against his chest while he held her and stroked her hair. They were tears of relief, of release, of a burden she'd carried alone for so long finally being shared. Preston held her through it all, whispering reassurances, pressing kisses to her hair, proving with every touch that his words were true. When her tears finally subsided, Victoria looked up at him with wonder. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think we found each other, Preston said, and I think we were always meant to. They moved to Preston's ranch the next day, beginning their life together in the small cabin while Preston started work on the house he'd promised her. True to his word, he never once made Victoria feel lacking. If anything, her confession seemed to have deepened his love, made him even more protective and cherishing of her. Victoria continued to work with her uncle, riding into town 3 days a week to help at his practice. The other days she spent at the ranch, learning to manage a household and helping Preston with the work. She learned to cook over a wood stove, to tend a vegetable garden, to care for chickens and preserve food for winter. Preston taught her to ride better, to rope calves, to read the weather in the shape of clouds. Their first winter together was harsh, with snow piling high against the cabin walls and temperatures that made Victoria's breath freeze in the air. But inside, with a fire crackling in the hearth and Preston's arms around her, Victoria had never felt warmer. They would lie in bed and make plans for the future, dream together about the house they'd build come spring. 4 bedrooms, Preston would say. Plenty of room. For guests, Victoria would add, and Preston would agree, but they both knew what he really meant. Room for the children they might adopt someday, when the time was right. In March, a traveling salesman came through Wood River with news that shook the town. There was an outbreak of diphtheria in a small settlement about 30 miles north, and they were desperate for medical help. Doc Williams was laid up with a broken leg, having slipped on ice the week before, and he looked at Victoria with apology in his eyes. "I can't make the journey," he said. "But they need help, Victoria. That disease spreads like wildfire among children." "I'll go," Victoria said immediately. Preston, who'd come to town with her, shook his head. "It's too dangerous. You're talking about a disease that kills." "Which is exactly why they need help," Victoria argued. "Uncle Edward, what do they need?" "What should I bring?" Her uncle gave her a list of supplies and instructions, but his expression was troubled. "Preston's right that it's dangerous, but you're also right that they need help. I won't order you to go, but I won't stop you either." The argument continued at home that evening. Preston paced the cabin while Victoria packed her medical supplies, his agitation clear in every movement. "I can't lose you," he finally said, the words bursting out of him. "Victoria, we've only been married 5 months. I can't lose you to some disease in a settlement where they probably don't even have proper facilities." Victoria stopped packing and went to him, taking his hands in hers. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But Preston, I'm a healer. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. Those children need help, and I have the skills to provide it. How can I live with myself if I stay safe here while they die?" Preston pulled her close, his face pressed into her hair. I know you're right, but that doesn't make it easier." "Then come with me," Victoria said. "You don't have to help with the medical work, but you could help in other ways. Fetching water, keeping fires going, whatever is needed. At least we'd be together." Preston pulled back to look at her. "You'd want that. I'd probably just be in the way." "You would never be in the way," Victoria assured him. "And yes, I'd want that very much." They left the next morning, riding north through country that was just beginning to wake from winter. The settlement, called Pine Hollow, was even smaller than Victoria had imagined, perhaps 15 families clustered in rough cabins along a creek. The local minister, a thin man named Reverend Walsh, met them with exhausted gratitude. "Thank God you've come," he said. "We've lost 3 children already, and more are sick." Victoria threw herself into work, moving from cabin to cabin, administering treatments and teaching mothers how to care for their sick children. Preston worked alongside her, his strength invaluable for hauling water and wood, for holding down thrashing children while Victoria cleared their airways, for a dozen other tasks that needed doing. They worked for 10 days straight, barely sleeping, eating only when Reverend Walsh's wife forced food into their hands. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. Children who'd been at death's door started to improve. The new cases became less severe. By the end of the second week, no new cases had appeared. Victoria was examining the last recovering patient when Preston appeared in the doorway of the cabin, his face gray with exhaustion. "I think we might have bitten it," he said quietly. "I think you're right," Victoria replied, but she could hear the tremor in her own voice. The relief was so strong it made her knees weak. They stayed 3 more days to be certain, and then the people of Pine Hollow gathered to see them off. Reverend Walsh pressed coins into Victoria's hand, money the settlement could barely afford, but she shook her head. "Use it for supplies," she said. "You'll need medicine, clean bandages. I'll write a list." "You've saved this settlement," a woman said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "You've saved our children." On the ride home, Preston was quiet. When they stopped to rest the horses, he finally spoke. "I was wrong to try to stop you from going." "You were scared," Victoria said gently. "That's understandable. No, it's more than that." Preston turned to face her fully. "I was being selfish, wanting to keep you safe, keep you with me, even if it meant children died. That's not the man I want to be, and it's not respecting who you are." Victoria felt emotion swell in her chest. "Preston, you're brilliant at what you do," he continued. "You saved lives back there. Real lives, children who'll grow up because of you. I'm proud of you, Victoria, so damn proud. And I promise from now on I'll support your calling, even when it scares me." "I love you," Victoria said, the words inadequate for what she felt. "I love you too," Preston replied. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They made love that night under the stars, tender and passionate and affirming. Afterward, wrapped in blankets by their campfire, Preston held her close. "When we get home, I'm hiring men to help with the ranch work," he said. "I want you free to practice medicine as much as you want. We'll make it work." "Are you sure?" Victoria asked. "Hired men are expensive." "You're worth it," Preston said simply. "Your calling is worth it. We'll manage." True to his word, Preston hired 2 ranch hands when they returned, young brothers named Sam and Henry Ford who'd come west from Ohio looking for work. It meant the ranch ran more smoothly, and Victoria had more time to dedicate to medicine. Word of what she'd done in Pine Hollow spread, and soon people were coming to see her specifically, sometimes traveling long distances for her help. Doc Williams officially made her his partner, propriety be damned, and together they saved lives and eased suffering across a wide swath of Montana territory. One afternoon in June, nearly a year and a half after their wedding, Victoria was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. A man and woman rode up, strangers, with worry etched deep in their faces. Behind the woman, wrapped in a blanket, was a small child. "Are you the lady doctor?" the man asked desperately. "The one who saved those children from diphtheria?" "I'm Victoria Cole," she confirmed, wiping dirt from her hands. "What's wrong?" The woman pulled back the blanket, revealing a little girl of perhaps 4, unconscious and burning with fever. "She's been like this since yesterday. We've ridden from over the pass." "Someone said you might be able to help." Victoria's heart clenched. "Bring her inside quickly." Preston appeared from the barn, drawn by the commotion, and helped carry the child into the house. Victoria examined her swiftly, her trained hands checking pulse and breathing, looking for signs of what ailed her. "It's pneumonia," Victoria said finally. "Bad but not hopeless. She needs rest, fluids, and constant care." She looked at the exhausted parents. "When did she last drink anything?" "This morning," the mother whispered, "but only a little." Victoria worked through the night, with Preston assisting and the parents hovering anxiously nearby. She administered medicine, kept the fever down with cool compresses, forced small sips of water between the child's lips every few minutes. By dawn, the little girl's breathing had eased slightly and her fever had dropped a degree or 2. "She's fighting," Victoria told the parents. "She's strong." The woman burst into tears. Thank you so much." It took 3 days, but the child, whose name was Sarah, recovered. When the family finally prepared to leave, the father offered to pay Victoria everything he had, but she refused to take more than a token amount. "Use it for your family," she said. "That's payment enough." After they'd ridden away, Preston found Victoria standing on the porch, watching the horizon. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You did it again," he murmured. "Saved another life. She's so young," Victoria said softly. 4 years old, with her whole life ahead of her now. Preston was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "Does it hurt? Treating children, I mean. Given what we talked about." Victoria leaned back against him, considering. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but mostly it fills something inside me. I can't give birth to children, but I can give them life in other ways. I can keep them in this world. That feels like purpose, Preston. Like maybe this is what I was meant to do all along." "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known," Preston said, kissing her temple. "Have I told you lately that I'm in awe of you?" "Not since yesterday," Victoria teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter again. The house Preston had promised was finally finished just before the first snow. A beautiful 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms upstairs, and a modern kitchen with a cast iron stove. Victoria had cried when she saw it completed, overwhelmed by the work Preston had put into making it perfect. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole," Preston had said, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her over the threshold while Sam and Henry cheered. They hosted a housewarming party, inviting everyone they knew. Doc Williams gave a toast to his niece and her husband, praising their dedication to each other and the community. Afterward, when everyone had gone home and they lay in their new bedroom with moonlight streaming through the curtains, Preston pulled Victoria close. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Victoria replied. "I have you, I have my work, I have this beautiful home. What more could I want?" "I've been thinking about what you said," Preston ventured. "About children who need homes." Victoria's breath caught. "Oh, there's an orphanage in Helena," Preston continued. "I was thinking when spring comes and the roads clear, maybe we could visit, just to see. No pressure, but if we met a child who needed us." Victoria turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. "Really, you want that?" "I want whatever makes you happy," Preston said. "But yes, I really want that. I want to be a father, with you as the mother. However that comes about." They made the journey to Helena in April when the roads were barely passable, but Victoria couldn't wait any longer. The orphanage was a large building on the edge of town, run by a stern but kind matron named Mrs. Patterson. "We have 32 children currently," she told them as she led them through the halls. "Ages ranging from infancy to 15. Most have lost parents to disease, accidents, or childbirth." They met the children in groups, and Victoria's heart broke and mended a dozen times over. There were so many, all needing love and homes and care. How could they possibly choose? And then they entered a room where older children were studying lessons, and a boy of about 8 looked up. He had dark hair and solemn gray eyes, and when he saw them, something flickered across his face. Hope quickly suppressed. "That's Michael," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "He's been here 3 years. His parents died of influenza. He's a bright boy, good with numbers and rating, but he's been passed over many times. People want babies or very young children usually." Victoria couldn't look away from Michael. There was something in his expression, a guardedness mixed with longing that spoke to her soul. "Could we talk with him?" she asked. Mrs. Patterson nodded and called Michael over. The boy approached cautiously, his posture defensive. "Michael, these are Mr. and Mrs. Cole," Mrs. Patterson said. "They're interested in meeting some of our children." "How do you do?" Michael said formally, his voice quiet but clear. Preston knelt down to be at eye level with the boy. "Hello, Michael. Mrs. Patterson says you're good with numbers. That's impressive." Michael shrugged. "I like how numbers work. They make sense." "I run a cattle ranch," Preston said conversationally. "Could always use someone good with numbers to help keep the books." A spark of interest lit Michael's eyes. "A real ranch, with horses and cattle and everything." "Everything," Preston confirmed. "My wife here is a doctor." "Well, she helps her uncle who's a doctor, but she's really the one who does most of the work." Michael looked at Victoria with surprise. "Ladies can be doctors." "This one can," Victoria said with a smile. "I also tend a garden, ride horses, and make pretty good biscuits when I put my mind to it." They talked with Michael for nearly an hour, and by the end, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that this was their son. She could see it in the way he responded to Preston's gentle questions, in how his guardedness slowly melted, in the hunger in his eyes when they talked about the ranch and life there. "Could we speak privately?" Victoria asked Mrs. Patterson. In the matron's office, Victoria didn't waste time. "We want to adopt Michael." Mrs. Patterson looked pleased but cautious. "He's been here a long time, he's built walls, it might take patience to reach him fully." "We have patience," Preston said, "and love, plenty of both." The legal process took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Preston and Victoria stayed in Helena and visited Michael every day. They brought him small gifts, told him stories about the ranch and Wood River, and slowly watched him begin to believe that this was real, that they truly wanted him. The day they rode away from the orphanage with Michael on a horse between them, Victoria thought her heart might burst. The boy kept looking back, as if he couldn't quite believe he was leaving, and then looking forward at them, wonder dawning in his eyes. "Is this really happening?" he asked as Helena disappeared behind them. "It's really happening," Preston assured him. "You're ours now, son, our family." "Family," Michael repeated, testing the word. Then quietly, "I like that." Bringing Michael home changed everything in the best way. The house that had felt too large suddenly felt just right. Michael was cautious at first, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, but Preston and Victoria were patient and consistent. They showed him his room, helped him settle in, and made sure he knew he was safe and wanted. Sam and Henry took to Michael immediately, teaching him ranch work and treating him like a little brother. Victoria helped him with his studies, marveling at how quick he was to learn. Preston taught him to ride properly, to work cattle, to fix fences, and 100 other skills. One evening, about a month after Michael's arrival, Victoria was tucking him into bed when he suddenly hugged her tight. "Thank you for picking me," he whispered against her shoulder. "I thought nobody ever would." Victoria held him close, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't pick you, sweetheart. We found you. The son we were meant to have." "Can I call you Ma?" Michael asked hesitantly. "And Preston Pa. Nothing would make us happier," Victoria managed through her tears. When she told Preston what Michael had asked, he had to step outside for a few minutes. When he came back in, his eyes were red, but he was smiling. "I'm a pa," he said wonderingly. "I have a son." "We have a son," Victoria corrected, and Preston pulled her into a kiss that tasted like joy and tears and everything good in the world. Michael thrived on the ranch. His walls came down gradually, revealing a sweet-natured boy with a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor. He excelled at his studies and took to ranch work naturally. More importantly, he laughed, something Mrs. Patterson said he'd rarely done at the orphanage. That fall, during Sunday dinner, Michael looked up from his plate and said, "There's a girl at the orphanage. Her name is Lucy. She's 6 and she's been there since she was a baby. She doesn't talk much, but she's real nice." Victoria and Preston exchanged a look. "Tell us about her," Victoria said gently. Michael set down his fork. She helped me sometimes when I felt sad, just sat with me. She's little, but she's brave. And I heard Mrs. Patterson say that nobody wants her because she's too quiet and they think something's wrong with her, but there's not. She's just careful. Careful how? Preston asked. Like she's watching to see if it's safe before she trusts, Michael said. Like I was. 2 months later, Lucy came home. She was tiny for 6, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she didn't speak for the first 3 days. But on the 4th day at breakfast, she looked at Victoria and whispered, "Thank you for the eggs." Victoria had to excuse herself to cry in the pantry while Preston held her and told her it was going to be all right. They were going to be fine, all of them together. Lucy attached herself to Michael, following him like a shadow. Michael took his role as big brother seriously, gentle and patient with her in a way that made Victoria's heart swell with pride. Slowly, gradually, Lucy began to bloom. She started speaking more, her voice soft but increasingly confident. She helped Victoria in the garden and the kitchen. Learning eagerly one day, Victoria found Lucy sitting with Preston in his office while he did the books. The little girl was watching intently as he wrote figures in his ledger. "Lucy wants to learn about numbers," Preston explained. "I thought I'd teach her." "Like Michael," Lucy said, the most words Victoria had heard her string together. "Michael's smart with numbers." "So are you," Preston said warmly. "Look, you already understand this column." Victoria left them to it, her heart full to overflowing. This was family. This was what they'd built together. Christmas that year was magical. They decorated the house with pine boughs and strings of berries. Victoria and the children baked cookies while Preston and the ranch hands cut a tree. On Christmas morning, Michael and Lucy woke before dawn, racing downstairs to find gifts under the tree. Victoria had sewn new clothes for both children and knitted them warm scarves. Preston had carved Michael a wooden horse and Lucy a doll. There were oranges, a rare treat, and peppermint sticks and books for both children. "This is the best Christmas ever," Michael declared, and Lucy nodded emphatically, clutching her doll. "Best Christmas of my life, too," Preston said, pulling Victoria close while they watched the children play. "Thank you." "For what?" Victoria asked. "For being brave enough to love me," Preston said. "For trusting me with the truth about children, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are." "I should be thanking you," Victoria replied. "You could have turned away when I told you I couldn't have children, but instead you gave me this." She gestured to encompass the room, the children, the life they'd built. "A family. Everything I didn't know I needed. Then you give me everything else instead," Preston quoted, smiling. "Remember, that's what I said, and you have. Every single day." The years that followed were full and rich. Victoria's medical practice grew, and she became known throughout the territory as a skilled healer. People traveled for days to seek her help, and she never turned anyone away. Preston expanded the ranch and, with Michael's help, kept meticulous books that allowed them to plan and grow wisely. Lucy overcame her shyness enough to sing in the church choir, her voice pure and sweet. She remained quiet by nature, but it was the quietness of contentment, not fear. She grew into a gentle, compassionate young woman who helped Victoria with her medical work, showing an aptitude for healing. Michael grew tall and strong, taking after Preston in build and temperament. He managed the ranch books with skill and eventually became Preston's full partner in running the operation. He was patient and kind, well-liked in the community. In the spring of their 6th year of marriage, Victoria and Preston returned to the Helena orphanage. They'd never forgotten the children they'd seen there, and their hearts remained open. This time, they came home with twin boys, age 5, whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father had perished in a mining accident. James and Joseph were wild and rambunctious, so different from the quiet children they'd adopted before. "Are you sure about this?" Mrs. Patterson had asked as the twins literally climbed the walls of her office. "They're handful." "We're sure," Victoria said, laughing as Preston plucked James off a bookshelf. The twins brought chaos and joy in equal measure. They tested boundaries, got into everything, and exhausted everyone. But they also brought laughter and energy and life. Michael and Lucy were wonderful with them, patient and loving, and slowly the twins settled, feeling secure in the love surrounding them. On a warm summer evening when Michael was 16, Lucy was 14, and the twins were 8, the family gathered on the porch after supper. It had become their tradition, this time together watching the sunset paint the mountains. "Pa," Michael said, "I've been thinking about my future." Preston set down his coffee cup, giving Michael his full attention. "What about it?" "I'd like to stay on the ranch," Michael said. "If you'll have me, not just as your son but as your partner for real, I want to build this place with you." Preston's eyes went suspiciously bright. "Son, nothing would make me prouder." "And I want to study medicine," Lucy added softly. "Like Ma, I want to help people like she does." Victoria reached over and squeezed Lucy's hand. "You'll be wonderful at it." "We want to stay too," James piped up, and Joseph nodded vigorously. "We like it here. This is home." "This is home," Preston agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He looked at Victoria, and the love in his eyes was everything. "For all of us. Always." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Victoria leaned against her husband's shoulder and surveyed her family. 4 children who'd needed love and had given it back 100-fold. A man who'd seen her for exactly who she was, and loved her not despite her perceived flaws but as a whole person. A life built on trust and commitment, and the daily choice to love. She thought back to that desperate moment 7 years ago when she'd confessed her inability to bear children, certain it would end everything. How wrong she'd been. How beautifully, wonderfully wrong. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, for her ears alone. "That you were right," Victoria replied. "I gave you everything else instead, but the truth is you gave me everything too. Everything that matters." Preston kissed her temple. "We gave each other everything," he corrected, "and built a life worth living." In the years that followed, their family continued to grow, not in number but in depth and connection. Michael married a sweet school teacher named Hannah and built a house on the ranch property, staying true to his word about partnering with Preston. They had 3 children who called Victoria and Preston Grandma and Grandpa, filling the main house with even more laughter and love. Lucy went to medical school in the East, one of the first women admitted, and returned to Wood River to open her own practice. She worked alongside Victoria, and together they saved countless lives. She married a lawyer named Thomas who supported her career completely, and they had 2 daughters who grew up watching their mother heal the sick with confidence and skill. The twins, inseparable as always, became expert horsemen and started a business training and selling horses throughout the territory. They built houses side by side on the edge of town and married sisters, causing endless good-natured confusion at family gatherings. Victoria and Preston grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. When Victoria's hair turned gray and Preston's face lined with age, they would still take evening walks around their property, hand in hand, marveling at what they'd built. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked one evening when she was 52 and Preston 55. They were grandparents many times over now, patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling, loving family. "That we didn't have biological children." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands just as he had on their wedding night so many years ago. "Not once," he said firmly. Not for a single second. Every child we brought into our home was meant to be ours. Every life you've saved, every person you've healed, that's your legacy. Our legacy. We built something better than I ever dreamed possible. How could I regret any of it? I love you, Victoria said, the words as true and essential as breathing. I've loved you from that first day when you protected me from flying bullets. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. Then you give me everything else instead, Preston quoted with a soft smile, the words that had become their private motto. And you have. Every day. Everything that matters. They lived to see their grandchildren grown, lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed, because two people had chosen love over fear and possibility over limitation. When Preston died peacefully in his sleep at age 78, Victoria held his hand and whispered all the things she'd never tired of telling him. That he was loved. That he'd been the best husband, father, and grandfather any family could want. That he'd made her life better in every conceivable way. She followed him 2 years later, her body finally giving out after a lifetime of service to others. She passed in the same bed they'd shared for decades, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. She loved you all so much, Lucy told the gathered family through her tears. You were her greatest joy. They buried Victoria next to Preston on a hillside overlooking the ranch they'd built together. The headstone was simple but spoke volumes. On Preston's side it read, "Beloved husband, father, and grandfather, he gave everything." On Victoria's, "Beloved wife, mother, and healer, she gave everything else." The family they'd created continued through the generations. The ranch stayed in the family, as did Victoria's commitment to medicine. Great-great-grandchildren who'd never met Preston and Victoria nonetheless knew their story, how two people had found each other in the Wild West and built a legacy of love that transcended biology and circumstance. In Wood River, now a modern town with paved streets and electricity, there stood a memorial in the town square. It honored Dr. Victoria Dalton Cole, the healer who'd saved countless lives despite never being officially recognized as a physician during her lifetime. Next to it was a plaque commemorating Preston Cole, rancher and family man, who'd supported his wife's calling and raised 4 adopted children with love and wisdom. But the real memorial was the family itself, sprawling and loving and strong. It was in Michael's great-great-grandson, who ran the ranch with the same pride and care his ancestor had. It was in Lucy's great-great-granddaughter who practiced medicine in Wood River's modern hospital. It was in the twins' descendants who still trained horses and lived side by side. It was in the story told and retold at family gatherings of how it all began, with a shooting in the street and a chance meeting, with a confession that could have ended everything and a response that changed everything instead. With two people who chose each other completely and built something that lasted long after they were gone. "I cannot give you children," she had said, her heart breaking. "Then you give me everything else instead," he had replied, his love unwavering, and she had, and he had. And together, they'd proved that family isn't always about biology. It's about choice and commitment and love that grows deeper with time. It's about building something that matters and leaving the world better than you found it. Their story became legend in Montana, passed down through generations, a reminder that the most important things in life can't always be planned or predicted. Sometimes the greatest blessings come from unexpected places. Sometimes what seems like limitation is actually opportunity in disguise. And sometimes, in the Wild West of 1882, a woman who thought she had nothing to offer, and a man who saw that she had everything could create a love story that would echo through time, inspiring generations yet unborn. The ranch still stands, modernized but recognizable. The house Preston built for Victoria has been preserved, and family members still gather there for holidays and celebrations. In the parlor hangs a portrait of Preston and Victoria, painted when they were 50 and 47 respectively. In it, Preston stands behind Victoria, his hands on her shoulders, both of them looking at the artist with expressions of contentment and peace. Around them, just visible in the painting, are their 4 children, ranging from teenagers to young adults. It's a family portrait, plain and simple. No one looking at it would know that not a single person in that painting shared blood with the couple at the center, because it doesn't matter. Love made them a family. Choice made them a family. Commitment and sacrifice and daily acts of care made them a family. And in the end, that was everything that mattered. That was everything that lasted. That was the legacy of Preston Cole and Victoria Dalton Cole, 2 people who met by chance in the Wild West and built forever together.